There was a time when women social activists asked men to stand up for their rights. But this time, we will do it by ourselves.
Because I'm a woman. Phenomenal woman. All you women and me.
Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of #SheTalk. It's where I, MalaniKai, go one-on-one with prominent and intriguing women from various walks of life. Well, we are about 3.5 months away from one of the most watched gubernatorial races in the nation. In 2018, my guest lost that race to current Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. In 2019, she became the first African-American woman to deliver the response to the State of the Union. And now, in 2022, could she become America's first African-American female governor? Stacey Abrams, thank you again for joining me for another edition of #SheTalk.
Thank you for having me back.
You've been hanging out in Southwest Georgia. What's the word on the street there?
It was fantastic to be back there. I launched my campaign there in March in Cuthbert. This time I was in Tifton and Dawson and Baconton and in Albany. And I'm there because this is a vital part of our state, and yet it is too often overlooked by the leaders of the state. Unfortunately, what I heard again and again is that they've been overlooked by the governor on the issues that impact our state's rural communities the most. Access to affordable health care, quality public schools, making certain they have access to broadband, housing. Housing is a crisis in South Georgia that is, unfortunately, a statewide issue. They're also facing increased gun violence, and they know that the current governor has no real plan for their success. They don't feel that he cares about them or that he cares about the problems that are facing them. And I've heard this whether I'm in Southwest Georgia, Southeast Georgia, Middle Georgia, or neighborhoods in Atlanta and Metro Atlanta. There are communities that have done well under this governor, and they're going to continue to do well. But the communities that are on the cusp, middle-class communities that want to do better, or working-class communities that simply need a little more help, feel that they've been completely left out and left behind by this current administration.
Speaking of Southwest Georgia, farmers are struggling all across America, but we're in Georgia. Let's focus on farmers, not just farmers. The plight of African American farmers is a huge deal that I think is not getting enough attention. What can your administration do if you become governor to make sure these African American farmers get some of the bailout money, stop losing their land, and can hang on to their livelihood?
So let's start with the fact that agriculture is the number one industry in Georgia. When Black farmers finally get the financial support they were due 20, 40 years ago, it lifts all farmers. And I worked during my time when I wasn't running for office, between 2019 and 2021, I worked with Senator Cory Booker, with David Scott, our congressman who chairs the Ag Committee. I worked with them on making sure that Black farmers in Georgia were given not only access to information, but I actually had an organization that hired folks to help them navigate the USDA. But the problem is the monies that were put into the budget by Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff to finally help Black farmers catch up after 20 years of being left out and left behind has been stopped by lawsuits. And those lawsuits, unfortunately, have not been pushed back against by our own state government. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that could come into the state to help Black farmers, and that would help all farmers. We also know that I was recently in Sparta, Georgia, in Hancock County. I was meeting with a group of farmers. They're having trouble with processing. A young man who has a cattle farm wanted to simply get his meat to market, and he was told he'd have to wait to 2023 because Georgia won't allow for mobile processing. And it's not that we can't do it. It happens in South Carolina. It happens in Tennessee. Georgia has not done what it needs to do to help small farms survive. And then the third issue that you raised, which is often a question of heir property, it's making sure that the land can actually stay in the family. And that goes to the larger housing and economic crisis that so many of our communities are facing. These farmers are having to sell off parts of their land simply to stay in business. If we had a governor who would create a family farm investment fund, which is something I'm thinking about doing, I would make certain we could help bridge the gap while we wait for the lawsuits to be settled. We need to be in those communities now because those farms are how we build economic capacity for the future. I want us to see family farming, especially in the Black and brown communities, as a way forward. It has worked for generations for everyone. Why not invest in it again now?
Democratic gubernatorial candidate for the great state of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, on hashtag #SheTalk. Let's talk about guns. I, like thousands of Georgians, legally carry guns. What we keep hearing is that Stacey Abrams wants to disarm Georgians. I've read your gun control legislation. I don't see that in there. Is there fine print? Is there an agenda that you did not put in your legislation that you want people like MalaniKai and thousands of other Georgians to not be able to own guns at all?
Not at all. I bought my dad, a few years ago, we bought my dad a gun cabinet for Christmas. Yesterday was my brother's birthday. We got him a gift certificate to the gun range. I like to shoot. I used to go shooting in Shenandoah Valley with a good friend of mine. I like guns, but when I learned how to shoot, my great-grandmother taught me how to shoot. Her name was Moo. And she said, the first responsibility is yours. You have to be responsible for the safety of that weapon. You don't point it at anybody, and you only shoot when you know what you're doing. The problem is not everyone has that training, and not everyone has that sense of obligation. We have to protect. And there are those who say, well, we can trust people. I believe in what Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. That's why we need background checks. That's why the concealed carry permit weakening, that law that Brian Kemp passed, where we strip away one of the few opportunities to make sure that dangerous people don't have weapons, that wasn't about being pro-gun. That was about being anti-people, because we need to make certain that folks who have felony convictions, folks who are mentally ill, people who are domestic abusers don't get those weapons. And there's this false narrative that only criminals will go and get these weapons. Well, people often use those weapons to become criminals. And that's the problem. We have to recognize that not every crime is out there in the public space to begin with. It happens when people get access to those weapons without training, without a background check, and without a sense of responsibility. I don't want to take anyone's guns. I believe we can protect the Second Amendment and protect second graders. And this is a false narrative that has been put out there because people want to make you afraid of me. I believe in law enforcement. I believe in guns. I grew up in Mississippi and in Georgia. But what I also know is that I don't live a one-dimensional life, that we have to be able to talk about protecting the Second Amendment and protecting our communities, that we can support law enforcement and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, my opponent thinks that he can just use one slogan and one frame, and that solves the problem. But I live in a family where I have a brother who has committed crimes, who needed to be arrested, and a brother who's been pulled over for driving while black so many times we can't count. I have to think about both of my brothers and my entire family, and that's why I'm running for governor, because we cannot have these single issue, single frame answers to complex issues. We've got to have safety and justice. We have to have the Second Amendment, but we also have to have gun safety in our communities because people are dying. And this is not right. We can't solve these problems, though, if the governor refuses to talk about it, let alone do something about it. And this is a governor who weakened gun laws to win an election. That bill had been proposed multiple times, and it failed every time because people knew it was wrong. But because he was afraid he would lose an election, he passed a law that puts the lives of Georgians in jeopardy, and that is extreme, that is wrong, and he should lose his job for it.
Speaking of current Governor Brian Kemp, is there anything that he has implemented in the past 4 years that is good, something you would keep in place should you become governor of Georgia?
I mean, I celebrate the fact that he finally responded to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery by passing the hate crimes legislation. But one good action does not eviscerate his lack of action on the issues of racial violence and police violence in communities that have a legitimate concern about their safety. I need a governor who's willing to have a complex conversation about what we face. I also need a governor who's willing to tell the truth. He has spent resources that the state of Georgia has brought in, that we've gotten money raised by our congressional delegation, by the Democrats and our congressional delegation, by Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, billions of dollars. I appreciate the fact that those dollars are being spent in communities, but he didn't bring the money here. And the problem is he is not spending the money on the communities that need it most. Georgia is sitting on $500 million that could stop evictions across the state, and he is refusing to spend that money. Valdosta is facing 11 evictions a day. We have a housing crisis, and Governor Kemp is refusing to act. Georgia can raise our standards, and we can have a better Georgia, but we need a better governor. You don't have to raise taxes to raise the quality of life in our state. If people go to my website, to StaceyAbrams.com, I show my math. I use his numbers, but I put together a spreadsheet that's been vetted by economists that show that we can do what's right for teachers, for law enforcement, for housing, for our communities, for our farmers, all without raising a single dollar in taxes. We just have to have the will and the belief that everyone deserves to thrive in the state of Georgia.
You've been on national news talking about the Supreme Court decision in reference to Roe v. Wade. One of the conversations I hear people having about Stacey Abrams is, how can someone like me, you're faith-based, you're a preacher's kid, I consider you a church girl too, how can Stacey Abrams believe the Bible and still support abortion?
Abortion is a medical decision. Let's be clear. Spontaneous abortion is that's the medical term for a miscarriage. Reproductive care is a healthcare decision. I grew up, as you did, with a very clear thinking with a very specific thinking on abortion. But the more knowledge I gained, the more I realized this is not a moral issue. This is a medical decision. If you have an ectopic pregnancy, if there is fetal abnormality, if the life of the woman is in danger, this is a conversation between a doctor and a woman. It is not a political conversation. And there are glib ways to say this, but here's where I come down on it. I want my doctor to be able to tell me how to save my life. I want the ability to determine my future. And I don't believe that forced pregnancy is the answer. And on the other side of things, Georgia has not done enough for the women in this state. We have 82 counties with no OBGYN or gynecologist. And this extreme ban means that women have to know they're pregnant before they know they're pregnant. They cannot get access to medical care ahead of time because Georgia has refused to expand Medicaid. And so issues like preeclampsia, hypertension, gestational diabetes are higher because we don't give access to medical care before a pregnancy happens. And that means we are putting the lives of women in danger. And the last thing I'll say is this. The law that Brian Kemp proudly signs, the law he has said that he would expand to eliminate exceptions for rape and incest, means that women can be investigated for miscarriages. And if you don't believe it's true, look at what's already happened in Texas with the same law. Yes, there's an exception in the bill, but the problem is, how do you prove it was a miscarriage and not a medical abortion? You have to be investigated. How do you prove as a 10-year-old that you were the victim of incest? You've got to file a police report. I don't know a 10-year-old who has the wherewithal to do that. We have to have laws in Georgia that respect women, respect their decisions, respect their bodies. And as a Christian, my belief is that this is a medical issue. This is not a political issue. And I am willing to stand on that and have that conversation with anyone. I had members in the caucus when I was a leader who did not share my belief about access to abortion. And I don't castigate them for that. But what I'd say to anyone is, I want you to think about your daughter, your sister, your friend, and ask if they should have to face a sheriff knocking on their door because they heard that there was a miscarriage and they are being treated as though they've made a decision that is a political decision versus a medical decision.
Stacey Abrams, currently president of United Earth, trying to be governor of Georgia. Thank you so much. Your time is very much appreciated. Are you traveling anywhere else around Georgia in the next upcoming days?
Absolutely. I'm going to be in North Georgia in the coming weeks. I've been to Southeast Georgia, Southwest Georgia, Middle Georgia, heading to North Georgia, and I'm always around Metro Atlanta. I'll be in Gwinnett this weekend and traveling the state because I want one Georgia where everyone thrives. I encourage people to go to StaceyAbrams.com to learn more.
Thank you, Stacey. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Malani.